All these men want to clap this girl if she can't reach the top of the mountain. But the top of the mountain is a dead end. Let's hope they will be easy on her. Let's find out what this story is about. But before that, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more clap stories in my channel. The movie begins with the couple, Jack and Alice, at a party with the rest of their friends, and they all have a great time. Then Jack and Alice go out for a car ride where Jack teaches her how to drive. They're both so in love. When they get back home and they start talking about Jack's boss, Frank, who is the leader of the community and is rich, has a tennis court in his house, and he doesn't like tuna. The conversation goes back and forth, and the house starts to suddenly vibrate. Turns out this happens a lot because all the men in the town are working on the project, where they're working for the development of progressive materials, and they're not supposed to talk about it with their wives. So every morning, the men step out of their homes, and all the wives kiss them goodbye, and they drive off in an open plane to the work headquarters, while all the wives stay home and take care of things. So Alice stays home and cleans the tub and the windows. She's a real trad wife, and she goes bus riding with the other wives. And then they go to a dance led by Frank's wife, Shirley, who tells them that the company has a new employee and his wife, Violet, will be joining their class. And then the women start dancing. After the class, Shirley talks to her friend Bun Bunny, who lives next door, and Bunny tells her about another wife in the neighborhood, Margaret, who has been having mental troubles. Then Bunny goes and screams at her kids. Then we see Alice taking down some hanging sheets, and she sees Margaret, and she's holding a toy plane. She goes to her kitchen and tries making a steak. She tries to crack an egg, but every time she cracks the egg, there's nothing in it. It's weird. Jack eventually gets home, and she greets him at the door, and almost immediately these two start getting nasty. And I mean freaking nasty, where Jack goes down on her on the dining table and she throws all the food on the floor. Yeah, it's crazy. After the cunnilingus, we see Alice and Bunny at a pool party, and they're talking about having kids because Alice and Jack don't have children. Then the entire gang goes to a party at Frank's house. And while that happens, everyone is busy partying and being cool, and the guys start talking about settling into the neighborhood while the women get acquainted with Violet. And she reveals that she and her husband Bill honeymooned in Sea Island, and turns out so did Alice and Jack. The conversation shifts as Bill says he wants to meet Frank, and then the next guy makes him feel like crap for even thinking about it because Frank is like a god to them. And then Shirley gathers everyone, and she starts talking about Frank, saying he has created something amazing. And while she speaks, Margaret walks in and says they shouldn't be here, and starts warning everyone. And then her husband Ted ushers her away. Then Frank steps in, smoothly talks to everyone, and starts saying a bunch of motivational things. He references Dr. Collins, the resident doctor of the community, and he officially welcomes Bill and Violet to the community. After the speech, Alice wanders looking for Jack, and she sees Margaret being spoken to by her husband. She says she's not fine and starts talking to Alice, but the conversation gets cut off. Alice finds Jack, who is trying to arrange his tie, and then they start kissing, and he takes down her panties. Let's just say things get a little nasty again. But while that is going on, Frank walks in and starts watching them, and Alice sees him watching, and they make eye contact, and then he just walks away. Then the women are at a shopping mall, and they start talking about Margaret. Apparently she used to be their friend until she went crazy and took her son with her to a place the men told the women not to ever go, and when the men finally found, her son had disappeared. Then the building starts shaking again, and turns out none of the wives know what they're doing out there, and Bunny tells them not to get curious and just do what the men say. The next day, Alice kisses Jack goodbye and she goes back to cleaning, during which she keeps getting visions and listening to Frank's voice on the radio. Then she goes on a bus ride with the ladies. They get off at some point, but she keeps going, and then she sees a plane crash. She tries to get the driver to go investigate, but he refuses because it's where the headquarters is. She decides to go by herself, and when she gets closer, she notices a strange building with glass doors. She puts her hands on the door, and we see a bunch of visions, and then she wakes up in her bed. Jack is already home, by the way, and he's trying to cook, and he's terrible at it. He also says he met her sleeping. Alice tells him about the plane crash, and he says there was no such thing. And then she says it was a weird dream, and they settle in for dinner. The next day, Alice tries to clean the glass walls in her home, and suddenly the walls start closing in on her, and then it stops. Then she receives a phone call from Margaret, who tries to talk to her, but she hangs up. At the dance class, Alice walks towards a set of mirrors and sees Margaret as a reflection. and Margaret smashes her head on the glass, and Alice screams. She runs home and finds Margaret on top of her roof. She calls out to her. Margaret looks at her and then slits her own throat and falls off the roof. As Alice tries to run to her, two men dressed in red catch her and drag her away. The scene cuts to her explaining the whole thing to Jack, and he informs her that she didn't see right and that Margaret slipped in her house due to her mental issues. She's been hospitalized, but she's gonna be fine. Then Alice says this whole thing was her fault because she ignored Margaret. Then she tries to convince Jack that there's something wrong with the neighborhood, and he doesn't listen. She tries to get him to tell her about the Victory Project, but he refuses to tell her and starts shouting at her and tells her that this is an opportunity for them to get a better life. Alice keeps having visions and hallucinations, and she keeps hearing a song. By the next day, Alice wraps her face with plastic wrap until she can't breathe, but manages to break out. They get visited by Dr. Collins, who tells her that she's just hallucinating and prescribes some drugs for her. But Alice says she doesn't need to take any, and Jack backs her up. Alice notices a file in Collins' suitcase with Margaret's name. So while Collins and Jack step outside, she takes out the file, then gives the suitcase to Collins. And when she's alone, she goes through the file, but every important information on the file has been redacted and can't be read. So she's frustrated and burns the file. Then she starts having more visions and wakes up in a hot tub. Jack walks in with a dress and tells he wants to have a baby, and then tells her to get ready for a party. At the party, Alice watches Frank and Collins from afar. Soon Shirley comes in and introduces a dancer who dances for everyone and then submerges herself in a giant cup of margarita. Alice notices that the girl dancing is one of the girls she's been seeing in her visions. She starts telling Jack that she wants to leave, and she tells her to relax. Frank gives another speech and invites Jack on stage and tells him he has been promoted to the senior advisory board on the Victory Project. Then he takes off Jack's suit and Jack starts dancing. Alice goes to the bathroom and she's having a panic attack while getting more visions. Then Bunny walks in and Alice starts telling her about everything, about Margaret and her fears, and Bunny tells her to get a grip and to be there for Jack, that she's sounding exactly like Margaret did. Meanwhile, Jack is still dancing and the boy has got moves. So Jack and Alice throw a celebratory party and Alice doesn't invite Bunny, but Frank and Shirley are present at the party. Alice goes to the kitchen and Frank joins her in the kitchen and tells her he's been waiting for someone like her, someone who will challenge him, that he wants her to keep digging for more information, basically daring her. At the dinner table, Frank sits on one end and Alice quickly sits on the other. She starts talking to Violet about how she met Bill, and it turns out their story is similar to her and Jack's story. A matter of fact, almost every couple seems to have a similar background, and she tries to claim that Jack is up to something shady, and Frank makes the claim that she's being crazy, that he has even slept with her. Then Alice confesses that she went to the headquarters and everyone is like, "You crazy girl." Then Shirley cuts her off and tells her to stop disrespecting her husband and leaves. So does everyone, leaving just Frank and Alice. And he tells her he was expecting more and walks out. Eventually Jack comes back in and he's all sad that she embarrassed him. But Alice tells him she loves him and that she wants to leave this place. After a lot of begging, he agrees and they get in the car. But he doesn't move and starts apologizing. And suddenly some men show up to take Alice away. Then we see her at an operating table and they start doing shock therapy on her. Flashback time. It turns out Jack is unemployed and he and Alice live in different places where Alice is a doctor. She comes back home one day while Jack is listening to a podcast by Frank, and he and Alice get into a fight because she's always working late. So he goes back to the podcast, the shock therapy ends, and Alice is back to normal, and Jack takes her home in his new car, and Bunny welcomes her. And Alice tells Jack to go back to work, that she's okay, and Alice gets greeted by Bunny's kids. Bunny and Alice sit down and have a talk, but her memory's all fuzzy, and she barely remembers Margaret. Soon Jack comes back home, and they start kissing again as Alice prepares dinner. As they get ready to eat, Jack starts singing a tone that Alice is constantly hearing, and her memories start coming back. And then we see Jack being vetted to join the program. And it turns out the Victory Project is a simulation that Frank built. Jack registered himself and Alice as husband and wife. She is meant to stay in permanently while he's allowed to only be in the program for a few hours. And he strapped Alice to the bed and forced her to be part of the Victory Project. Back in the program, Alice remembers and starts arguing with Jack as he tries to apologize for lying to her. But things soon get out of hand, and she smashes a cup on his head, ending his life. Then Bunny rushes in and tells her she knows they've been in a simulation all along, but this is the only place she can see her kids, so that's why she stays. It turns out all the other women in the neighborhood, apart from Bunny, are all prisoners as well. Then she tells Alice to run to the headquarters and do what she did before because that's how to get out. So Alice runs out, and the men start panicking and try to stop her, but she gets in Jack's car and drives off while she's chased by the men in Red and Collins. She manages to get a Collins to crash into the other men, chasing her, and keeps driving off. Franks finds out about the whole thing and tries to rally more men after her. But then he suddenly gets stabbed by Shirley, who says it's her turn now. Alice gets to the headquarters hill, but her car gets stuck. She starts running on foot as some more men keep chasing her. She eventually gets to the glass doors and touches them, and then we cut to black and then we hear her take a breath. It looks like she made it back to the real world. That's it for the movie. A little anticlimactic, but that's it for Don't Worry Darling. Let me know what you think about the movie in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more clapping stories. Thanks for watching.